Her hand was on the door. The restaurant behind her was loud with a Friday crowd, and she had her coat already on, her bag already over one shoulder, and she had been reaching for the handle for what felt like a long time, without quite making contact with it. Darius had not moved from the table. The roses were still there, white against the cloth. And he was watching her, and waiting for whatever she was about to decide. She had asked him something. He had answered. Now it was her turn. He had brought the roses before he knew anything. That was the part he kept thinking about, that the roses had been real before anything else was. A person can do the right thing for reasons that later embarrass them and still have done the right thing. The act and the motive are not always the same size. The school where Darius Okonkwo taught woodshop was called Lincoln Middle, and it sat on the edge of Grover Mills, a town of 12,000 in central Ohio that had a Dairy Queen and a Tractor Supply and a farmer's market on Saturdays that was very proud of itself. He had been teaching there for 6 years. Before that, he had been a project manager at a construction firm in Columbus, making more money and fewer things with his hands. And before that, he had been a husband. He was not a husband anymore. The divorce had been, in the accounting of their mutual friends, Darius's fault, not in the legal sense, but in the sense that he had made a choice Elena could not follow. He had left the firm. He had taken the teaching job. The pay cut was 40%, and the hours were different, and the status was different, and Elena had said, when she left, that she felt like she had married one man and was being asked to stay with another. He understood what she meant. He was not certain she was wrong. He was certain that the man she had married was not one he could continue to be. His son Kofi was 9. He spent weekends with Darius and weekdays with Elena, who had since remarried a man in commercial real estate named Todd. Kofi liked Todd well enough, and Darius liked that Kofi liked Todd, and neither of these things was simple, and all of them were true simultaneously. Kofi was at the age where he observed everything and volunteered his observations at unexpected moments. He had his father's patience and his mother's precision. What this meant in practice was that Kofi said things that were true and inconvenient and could not be argued with. Darius had stopped trying. Marcus called on a Sunday evening, as he always did, and opened with, "Have you talked to anyone new in the last month?" Darius was in the shop he had set up in his garage, 3 years in the building, with a wall of hand tools and a decent table saw and a band saw that had cost him more than it should have. He had the phone on speaker on the workbench while he planed a piece of cherry for a bread box someone had commissioned. "I talk to people every day," Darius said. "I teach middle school. That's not what I mean, and you know that." "Marcus, I'm asking because I care about you, not because I'm keeping score. When did Elena leave? 2.5 years ago. In 2.5 years, have you had dinner with one person who was not a colleague or a family member or the father of one of Kofi's friends?" Darius ran the plane along the wood. The shaving curled up in a thin ribbon and fell to the floor. "Bethany at school wants to set me up with someone," he said. "Is she good at that?" "I have no idea. Did you say yes?" "I said yes." A pause. "Good. Call me after." He told Marcus he would. He did not call Marcus after, because the after was more complicated than he had predicted, and he needed to think it through alone before he could think it through with anyone else. This was a habit of his. Elena had said so repeatedly. He noted this and said nothing about it to Marcus. The woodshop at Lincoln Middle was a long room at the north end of the building that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil and the particular dry warmth of machine motors running all day. Darius had organized it exactly the way he wanted and fought every budget request to get the machinery he needed and spent 2 summers refinishing the worktables himself. His students made things there, actual things, objects that existed in the world after the bell rang. He found this important. He had found it important long before he could have said why. The room had a wall at the far end where he kept finished student projects, birdhouses, small boxes, a little stool built by an 8th grader named Jerome that was so clean it made the other teachers stop and look when they came by. Darius kept them because he believed the students should know that what they made had a weight to it, a permanence that outlasted the semester. A few parents had come to get them back. He always returned them. A few parents never came. He kept those. When Kofi came to pick up his father on early release Fridays, he always went to the woodshop first. He would sit on the stool at the far end of the room and watch his father work and say very little, which was, Darius had decided, the clearest proof that the boy was his son. On the Friday 3 weeks before the date, Kofi sat on the stool and watched Darius sand a cabinet door and said, after approximately 15 minutes of silence, Marcus called. What did he say? He asked to talk to you, but you didn't have your phone. So he told me. Kofi appeared unconcerned by the irregularity of this. He said you've been like a monk. Without the praying part. Did he? Kofi looked at the cabinet door. He's not wrong, he said. You never talk about anyone. Mama talks about Todd all the time. Like he's in the next sentence. You talk about me and about school. Nobody else is in the next sentence. He was not wrong. Darius knew he was not wrong. Which was different from knowing what to do about it. Bethany at school wants to set me up with someone, Darius said. Kofi considered. Did you say yes? I said yes. Kofi nodded and looked at the cabinet. What are you making that for? Someone wants it for a mudroom. Are you going to put the dovetails on the inside? Darius looked at his son. How do you know about dovetails? I watch you, Kofi said, as though this explained everything, which it did. He left the shop with Kofi at 3:30, the cabinet door still on the bench, the sandpaper beside it. He drove home with Kofi in the back seat, looking out the window the way he did when he was thinking, and Darius resisted the impulse to ask what he was thinking about, because Kofi would tell him when he was ready and not before. They cooked dinner together. Kofi's preference was for spaghetti on Fridays, a tradition they had arrived at by accident and maintained by habit. Kofi grated cheese with the precision of someone who had decided that cheese grating was worth doing well. Darius stirred the sauce and thought about the date the following week, and about what Marcus had said on the phone, and about the fact that nobody was in the next sentence. Dad, Kofi said. Yeah, is Bethany good at telling if two people will like each other? Darius stirred the sauce. I don't know. Kofi considered this. I think, he said carefully, that whether you like someone depends mostly on whether you decide to see them, not on who sets it up. He was 9 years old. He had his father's patience and his mother's precision, and some third thing that belonged to neither of them and could not be accounted for. That's true, Darius said. Kofi nodded and returned to the cheese. His colleagues were, for the most part, fine people. There was Phil in science, who brought food to every meeting. There was Amara in English, who had strong opinions about serial commas and expressed them freely. There was the vice principal, Ron, who managed everything with a diplomatic patience that Darius respected. And there was Bethany. Bethany taught 8th grade social studies and ran the teacher's lounge the way a general runs a campaign, with intelligence, long memory, and strategic deployment of information. She was not cruel, that was important to say. She was the kind of person who organized things because organizing gave her pleasure, and who sometimes confused entertainment with harm because she had never been on the receiving end of her own organizing. The blind date was her idea. He had agreed on a Tuesday. He had regretted it by Thursday. He had done nothing about the regret because a conversation with Bethany required more energy than he had after a full day of 8th graders. He found out about the joke the day before the date. He was in the woodshop after hours, sanding the edge of the cabinet door, when he heard Bethany through the wall of the supply room, talking to Phil, her voice carrying through the thin partition in the way voices did when people thought they were alone. It's going to be so funny, she was saying. He shows up expecting someone his age and she's like 63, she knits, she volunteers at the library. He's going to be so uncomfortable. Phil said something Darius couldn't hear. No, she doesn't know either. I told her it was someone a friend of mine knew. She thinks it's a real setup. Phil said something else. It's just dinner. It's a joke. He'll laugh about it eventually. Darius set down the sandpaper. He sat on his workbench and looked at the cabinet door and did not move for a while. He thought about the woman, Margaret something. Bethany had said her name, a widow. She knits. She volunteers at the library. Who thought she was going on a real date. He had been on the receiving end of a setup before. He knew the particular specific hope of it, the half hour before, getting dressed with more care than you would usually apply, the quick mental preparation for the possibility of disappointment. He thought about what that preparation looked like for a woman who had lost a husband, who had been alone for however many years, who had said yes to something she believed was genuine. He thought about what it would feel like to arrive at a restaurant for what you believed was a genuine introduction and realize, at some point during the evening, that you had been somebody's punchline. He thought about calling Bethany. He did not do that. What a person does in the 10 minutes after they overhear something they were not supposed to hear is a more accurate portrait of their character than almost anything they do in public. There is no audience. The only witness is the decision itself. He stayed in the shop another hour, the same hour he always needed when something had shifted and he had to reckon with the shift. He sanded the cabinet door that did not need more sanding. He thought about the woman who would get dressed and drive to a restaurant believing she was meeting someone who was meeting her in kind. He thought about the distance between that belief and what was actually true, and about who was responsible for the distance, not her. He thought about Kofi saying, "Nobody else is in the next sentence." He thought about what it meant to show up as the right person for the wrong reasons, and whether the reasons outweighed the showing up. He did not reach a conclusion. He drove to the florist on Maple before it closed, and bought a dozen white roses, because if Margaret, whoever she was going to a real date, then she deserved to arrive and find someone behaving as though it were one. The fact that he was also, quietly, refusing to be anyone's punchline was also true. He was not sure how large that part was. His mother called on Thursday morning before school. "Bethany is setting you up with someone," she said. "Not a question. Who told you that?" "Phil, at your school, is friends with Dorothy Kwame from my church." She said this without apology. "Darius, I know you think I'm going to tell you to be careful. I'm not going to tell you to be careful. I'm going to tell you to be present." He was in the parking lot of Lincoln Middle with 7 minutes before his first class. When you were with Elena, the last 2 years, you were somewhere else. In the shop, in your head, in the future version of your life. You were making furniture for a life you hadn't arrived in yet. I understand what you're saying. She's going to be a real person. Treat her like one. He went in and taught his classes. He thought about be present the way he thought about instructions for wood joinery. Simple to understand, not simple to do. He did not go straight home after school on the day of the date. He went to the wood shop and stayed an hour after the last bell, not because there was work that required staying, but because the shop was the place where he could think without anyone asking him questions. He had been in this room, in some form, for 6 years. He knew the sound the bandsaw made when the blade needed tensioning, and the smell of white oak versus red, and the exact weight of silence after a class left. He had made this room what it was. This room was what he had chosen when he chose differently from what Elena had needed. He had been a project manager, and he had been good at it, and it had not been enough. Teaching was enough. The chair he had built with Kofi at 4 was enough. The fact that choosing this had cost him something did not make the choice wrong. He thought about the woman who would get dressed tonight and drive to Cielo believing she was meeting someone who had been honestly introduced to her. He thought about what that preparation looked like, the particular half hour before, the specific hope of it. He thought about all the ways the evening could go badly even if he showed up correctly, and about whether showing up correctly mattered if the evening went badly anyway. He decided it did. He straightened the tools on the wall and left the work light on the bench burning for the overnight staff, as he always did. Then he drove to the florist on Maple. He told no one. Not Kofi, who was with Elena that weekend. Not Marcus, who would have had something useful to say. Not his mother, who would have had several things to say and none of them brief. He put on a clean shirt and went to Cielo. Cielo was the nicest restaurant in Grover Mills, which was not saying a great deal. It had white tablecloths, and a wine list, and a hostess who recognized most of its regulars, which was about half the town. He arrived first. He ordered water. He asked for a table in the middle of the room, not a corner, because a corner felt like hiding. He set the roses in the center of the table and looked at them. They were white. He had considered red and decided against them for reasons he had not fully articulated to himself, but which had something to do with the fact that red roses were what you brought when you were confident. And he was not confident. He was present. He was trying to be what his mother had told him to be. He watched the door. People came in from the cold in ones and twos, and he watched each one and knew, before Margaret arrived, that he would know her. He could not have explained this prediction. He just knew. When Margaret Ellison came through the door, he knew her immediately, not because he had a photograph, but because she was the only woman in the restaurant who paused at the entrance and looked around in the way of someone who had dressed carefully for something that mattered. She was in her early 60s. She was also tall, nearly his height, with white hair cut close and a dark blue dress, and the deliberate posture of someone who had long ago decided to take up whatever space she was in. She wore small pearl earrings and a watch that was clearly old and clearly maintained. She saw him stand, and something moved across her face, a brief recalibration, and then she walked toward him. "Margaret Ellison," she said. "Darius Okonkwo." He extended his hand. "I'm glad you came." She looked at the roses on the table. She looked at him. "You brought flowers." "I did." She sat down across from him and picked up the menu and set it down again. "I have to tell you that I was prepared to be completely miserable at this." "Me too," Darius said. She looked at him sharply, then laughed. It was a short, unguarded laugh, the kind that had not planned to happen. "Well, at least we're honest." They ordered. The hostess came and went, and they sat for a moment, in the particular silence of two strangers who have just agreed to be honest with each other and are now deciding what that means in practice. "How did Bethany describe me?" she asked. "She said you were a friend of a friend." "She didn't tell me much." She looked at the roses. "She told me you were a teacher. That was all." "I teach too. I taught, actually, art history at the community college. Retired 2 years ago." She looked up. "So we have that in common, at least, the classroom. What made you retire?" "My knees objected to the stairs." She said it dryly, and Gerald had been gone 9 years, and I had been working partly to fill the house with noise, and I decided I could find better noise. She set the menu down with a small, definitive motion. "I volunteer at the library now. I'm learning to use the ceramics wheel. Badly, I garden, which I do well." A pause. "I'm telling you this because Bethany almost certainly described me as a widow who knits and volunteers at the library, and while that is accurate, it is also incomplete." He looked at her. He was not entirely sure if she had guessed something or was simply covering all possible bases. "She did mention the library," he said. She nodded once, satisfied, and opened the menu. "She got the salmon." She got the salmon. He got the chicken. She drank 1 glass of white wine, and he drank sparkling water, and they talked, first carefully, in the way of two people conducting mutual reconnaissance, and then less carefully, because she turned out to have opinions about public school funding that were both informed and blunt, and he turned out to have opinions about historic preservation in small Ohio towns that she found worth challenging. At some point she asked what he taught. "Woodshop," he said. "Middle school." "What do they make?" "Depends on the year. This year we're doing a birdhouse unit with the 7th graders. The 8th graders are working on small cabinets, 1 per student, built to spec. Some of them are good enough that they're keeping them." "Did you always do this? Teach?" "No. I was in construction management before." He set his fork down. "I realized I was managing other people's work, but not making anything myself. I needed to make something." He paused. "My son and I built a chair the first summer I left. Just a simple ladder back. He was 4. He held the dowels while I set them." She looked at him. "My late husband was a furniture maker," she said. "Not professionally. He was a high school history teacher, but he built most of what's in my house." "In our house." She corrected the tense with the precision of someone who has spent years negotiating which one is accurate. "My house now." Darius looked at her. "I'm sorry." 11 years, she said. "You'd think I'd have the grammar sorted." She said it with a dryness that was not bitterness, the tone of someone who had learned to look at hard things directly because looking away had proven less effective. At some point the conversation reached the small quiet between two people who have said the surface things and are deciding whether to go further. She picked up her wine glass and held it without drinking. "You were a project manager," she said. "What kind of projects?" "Commercial construction. Offices, a few mixed-use buildings. I was good at it." He looked at the table. "The first project I managed from start to finish was a 6-story office building. Took 18 months. I stood in front of it when it was done and thought, I can't feel a single thing I made in it with my hands. And that mattered. Not at first. I thought it was vanity. My father did millwork, trim carpentry, and I thought I'd chosen something bigger. And I had, in one way. In the other way, I hadn't chosen anything at all. I'd just moved further from it. She was listening with the quality he would come to recognize as hers specifically, not waiting for him to finish, but actually present in what he was saying, tracking it the way you track the grain in a piece of wood before you decide which way to cut. Gerald used to say, she said, that you can spend 20 years building a life that is very impressive and completely wrong, and then you can spend the next 20 building one that is very small and completely right. A pause. He turned down a university position to stay in secondary school. His department chair thought he'd lost his mind. Had he? She smiled. Small, contained, he had students who became doctors and lawyers, and one who became a furniture maker, a woman who studied with him for 2 years and now has a shop in Columbus. She looked at the table. He didn't know the size of the thing he was doing while he was doing it. Most people don't. At some point, she set her wine glass down and looked at him with the directness he was beginning to recognize as her natural mode. Something happened, she said, between the construction firm and the classroom. What was it? He considered how much to answer. My marriage ended, he said. It made me reckon with what I'd chosen and why. Whether it was right. And was it? The job change? Yes, he looked at the table. The marriage ending, I don't know if right or wrong is the right frame for it. It was what happened. She nodded with the same quality she brought to most things, not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement that what you said was true and worth noting. Gerald and I almost separated, she said. 12 years in. We were living in the same house, like very polite colleagues. We went to a counselor for 9 months, worked through it. She picked up her wine. I'm glad we did. We got 20 more years after that. What changed? We decided to. She said it simply, the way she said most things. It wasn't more complicated than that. We decided the marriage was worth more effort than we had been giving it. She looked at the table. I'm not saying that's what should have happened for you. I'm saying it's possible to choose the thing you already have. People forget that's a choice. He sat with that for a moment. He had not, in 2.5 years, heard it said that plainly. The entrees came and went, and they did not run out of things to say. At some point he noticed that the Friday crowd had thinned, and they were one of only a few tables left in the room, and he looked at his watch and saw that it was nearly 10. I should let you go, he said. She picked up her bag and he stood with her, and he said, genuinely, I'm glad you came. She looked at him for a moment, a different look from the recalibration at the door. That had been adjustment, recategorization. This was something else. She picked up her coat. You knew, she said. He went still. I suspected it on the way here, she said. The way the setup was described, the vagueness of it, the particular kind of enthusiasm the woman who called me had, like she was trying not to laugh. She put her coat on with the same deliberate economy with which she did everything. I decided to come anyway. I thought, if someone is going to the trouble of making me the butt of a joke, I might as well see what the joke is. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the door. Her hand reached for the handle and paused. She turned back. You brought roses, she said. He said nothing. You knew what it was supposed to be. She looked at him across the emptying restaurant, the white tablecloth and the white roses between them. Why did you bring roses? He thought about the florist on Maple. He thought about nobody being in the next sentence. Because you were going to a real date, he said. Someone should have shown up to one. There are things that cannot be planned or managed into being. They arrive as decisions made without an audience, in the 10 minutes when nobody is watching, and they are either true or they are not. There is no middle version. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I'd like to see this wood shop sometime. He looked at her. I can arrange that. She went out the door. He stood for a moment at the table with the roses still there, white against the cloth. Then he picked them up, because she had not taken them and he was not going to leave them for the busboy, and he went to get his coat. He called Marcus the next morning. How'd it go? Marcus asked. Strange. Good. That order? In that order. Tell me. He told Marcus about the roses and about overhearing Bethany and about arriving at the restaurant anyway. He told Marcus about Margaret in the blue dress, about the laugh that had not planned to happen, about we decided to, and the 2 hours at her kitchen table with Gerald's furniture around them. Marcus was quiet. You bought flowers for a woman you'd never met because you didn't want her to walk into a joke alone. That's one way to say it. Is she in the next sentence? He looked out the window at his yard, where the November grass was brown and the maple had finished losing its leaves. He thought about "we decided to," as though choosing was something you simply did when you understood that the alternative was worse. "I don't know yet," he said. "Fair enough. Call me when you do." He found out the next morning that Bethany had told people. Phil came into the teacher's lounge and made the face of someone holding back laughter they knew was wrong. Bethany had put together a debrief. She had been showing people Margaret's response, the yes. She thought that was the punchline, Phil said, with the decency to look uncomfortable. Darius went back to the woodshop. He taught 3 classes and did not bring the anger into it, because the anger was his and the students' work was theirs. At lunch, Amara said, "I heard what Bethany did and nothing else." "Did Margaret know before last night?" "I don't think so. Vera called her this morning." He thought about the yes she had sent him privately, now held up for other people to laugh at. He called her from his car during his prep period. She answered on the 2nd ring. "Margaret, I think you've heard something today. I want to talk to you about it before anyone else does." A pause. "Vera called me an hour ago. Can I come by? I want to say this to you in person." Another pause. 42 Sycamore. He finished his last class and picked up Kofi at Elena's and drove to Sycamore Street with Kofi in the back seat. "Where are we going?" "To see someone I had dinner with last night." "Do you like her?" "I just met her." "Dad, I don't know yet," Darius said, and Kofi appeared to know this was honest, and also somewhat less than honest, and said nothing else until they pulled up in front of 42 Sycamore, a craftsman bungalow with a deep front porch, and a garden that had been put to bed for winter, but was clearly in its structure. The work of someone serious. He told Kofi to wait in the car. Kofi nodded. Margaret came to the door before he knocked. She was in canvas pants and a sweater, and she looked like herself in a way that felt more accurate than the dinner, which he meant as a good thing. Her expression was not warm, exactly, it was attentive. He stood on her porch and told her everything. He told her about hearing Bethany through the partition in the woodshop. He told her about buying the roses knowing what he knew. He told her about the messages and what Bethany had done with the yes. He told her that he was sorry, not as a formality but specifically, sorry that she had been made someone's entertainment without her knowledge. Sorry that the yes she had sent privately had been held up for other people to laugh at. He did not tell her what to do with any of it. The truth told too late is still worth telling if the alternative is silence. The question is what you owe the other person and whether you have been honest with yourself about why you waited. Her face had not changed its quality of attention throughout. "I know," she said. "I know you know. I wanted to be the one to say it to you." She looked at him for a long moment. "You could have not shown up at all. Cancelled when you overheard." "Yes, but you bought roses." "I did." She stepped back from the door. "My porch is cold." "Come in." He looked at the car. "My son is with me." "I should have mentioned." Margaret looked at the car. Kofi, in the back seat, waved. She looked back at Darius. "Go get him," she said. Kofi, on the porch, examined the garden with his usual seriousness. "You have a lot of dead plants," he told Margaret. "They're not dead. They're dormant. There's a difference." Kofi thought about this. "Like sleeping?" "Exactly like sleeping. My dad makes furniture. He made me a chair when I was 4. He told me he works with wood." Kofi looked at her, then at his father. "He usually doesn't talk about the furniture when he just meets people. He only talks about it when he likes someone." Darius looked at the middle distance. "I see," Margaret said. She was looking at Darius. Children tell the truth about adults that adults are too practiced to tell about themselves. They haven't yet learned to mistake tact for accuracy. Inside, her house was full of books and 2 large cats and a dining table that had clearly been built by hand, not for sale, but for use, which was a different priority and showed in the joints. He ran his hand along the edge when she wasn't watching. She was watching. Gerald made it. He built most of what's in this room. He stood with his hand on the table and looked at the bridle joints at the corners, cut by hand, the fit so close you could barely find the seam. Gerald had done them without a biscuit joiner, you could tell from the slight variation in depth. A man who did not believe in shortcuts. He knew what he was doing, Darius said. He did. She looked at him directly. So did whoever taught your hands what they know. He stayed 2 hours. Kofi fell asleep on her couch, under one of the large cats, and she brought out tea, and they sat at Gerald's table and talked. About wood and school, and a book about the craftsman movement that they had both coincidentally read in the preceding year. "What are you building now?" she asked. "A mudroom cabinet. I've been at it for a while. What's taking so long?" I got interrupted. And then after the interruption, I wasn't sure what it was for any more. She looked at him with the fully-on listening that made him say things he had not planned to say. "Finish it. You'll know where it belongs when it's done." He woke Kofi at 8. And Kofi stood up, looked at Margaret, and said, "Are we coming back?" Darius started to answer. "You can answer that," Margaret said to Darius. "I'll allow it." He looked at her across Gerald's table, with the lamp on and the cats somewhere in the back of the house, and Kofi watching him with his evaluating attention. "Yes," Darius said. "We're coming back." On Monday morning, the shape of the weekend had shifted around Bethany's joke. Amara had told Ron. Ron had spoken to Bethany on Friday afternoon, and she had come out quieter than she went in. Phil had sent a message, "I should have said something." Darius had replied, "Yes, but you didn't, and it's okay." Phil's guilt was Phil's to manage. Bethany came to the woodshop at the end of the day. "I don't know how to do this well," she said. "You could try, honestly." She sat on the stool by the near workbench. "I thought it would be funny. I didn't think about what it would feel like for her. Or for you." "Which part?" "Any of it." "Ron asked me if I'd reached out to Margaret. I haven't. I don't know what to say. The same thing you just said to me, probably shorter." She left. He found out, weeks later, that she had sent Margaret a handwritten note, and that Margaret had said nothing about it to him, which told him everything he needed to know. He and Margaret went to dinner a second time, 3 weeks later. She wore a green sweater and no particular expression of effort. They talked about Gerald and Elena, and what it meant to make something that outlasted the circumstances that produced it. She had been considering selling the house, large for one person, and her daughter in Cleveland wanted her closer. "Why not?" he asked. "The table," she said. "I don't know how to move a table Gerald built into someone else's house." He understood this completely. In March, when her garden came back, she sent him a photograph of the first crocuses, purple, bright against the grey soil, with no message. He looked at it for a long time before he set his phone down and went back to the cabinet he had been sanding the night he overheard Bethany through the partition, the one he had not finished because the weekend had gone differently than expected. He finished it in April. He thought about where it should go. He did not rush the answer. He called Marcus in April. "She's in the next sentence." Marcus was quiet. "Does she know that?" Darius looked at the finished cabinet, the dovetails clean on the inside where nobody could see them unless they looked. "I'll tell her. The wood worked correctly, holds. Not because it is hard, but because it was given time, dried right, joined right, left to settle into what it is. The things that last are rarely the things that were finished quickly."